Hi, my name is Kunal, and welcome to the Geeks of the Valley podcast, which connects with some of the brightest minds globally who are leading their respective industries today to discuss the hottest upcoming industry trends and how their work is affecting the global economy. This morning, from Tokyo, Japan, we have the general partner of Airbus Ventures for Asia Pacific joining us. Please welcome Louis Pinault. Louis, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
And how are things with you in light of COVID?
Pretty well. Lucky to say that myself, our Airbus Ventures team, my family, all seem to be well and healthy. Thank you very much. Importantly, our portfolio companies across the world seem to be coping, managing, healthy, in some cases even adding something to the solution and managing some great successes in the midst of all the hardships. But I appreciate it's a tough time for the world. There's still a last lap to go. And I hope that we're seeing through some of the innovations that might help us all see a better and brighter future.
I'm really happy to hear that. And if I may ask, what are some of those pivots some of your portfolio companies have kind of made till date due to COVID?
So I guess some of the things that you would expect from portfolio companies, which is mitigating risks for themselves, managing down their monthly burn rate, being prepared for new contingencies, implementing all needed safety regimes where they have to be. We have a couple of specific instances where the real pivots have been around the technology. A couple of companies in our portfolio, including Koniku in the US, Rubix in Europe, who were originally working on sensitive detection technologies for things like explosives, have now pivoted to important detection and sensing for COVID and related pathogens. So I'm happy to see that kind of adaptability. We also see a situation where some of our companies, one I'm on the board with in the US, Astrospace, managed its first successful launch to orbit just last week. They sent a team of 5 people up to Alaska, where they launched from California. Unfortunately, the entire team had to be isolated for reasons of COVID. Within 24 hours, they had a second team of 5 up and successfully managed the launch. So, the safety regimes, the integrity, the responsiveness is something we're really proud of. We anticipated, a degree of nimbleness as you hope when you invest in a startup company and a great team. And we're pleased and sometimes amazed to see how well they're doing through this very difficult and challenging time.
Can you tell us about yourself and your background and how it led you to the path of becoming a general partner with Airbus Ventures?
I'm sure that everyone's path in venture capital is probably different. So far as I know, there's still not a manual or a classic approach, and the field of venture capital itself is evolving so fast. I think it will keep changing. For myself, it was coming out of MIT as an enthusiastic engineer, deeply interested in innovations in East Asia. I first worked as an engineer in Japan for a Japanese engineering company. And after some years of that, I wound up after grad school with the Boston Consulting Group. I ultimately became a partner in the consulting industry some years later. But I knew that I wanted to go back to something closer to my origins in engineering and science. I went back to school again. I did a combined program sponsored by NASA, thankfully, in planetary geophysics and international public law, specifically interested in the mining potential of asteroids. I worked for NASA for a bit, but I found myself thinking about what I might be able to offer together with some fellow researchers. We tried to start our own company focused on satellite data analytics. And I approached would-be customers like Airbus to try to convince them that they could gain some benefit from what we had to offer. So I quickly discovered that being a startup trying to work with a large corporate customer is not an easy thing. Airbus recognized the same and were interested in how they could better work with individual researchers, startup companies, even competitors in some environments through incubators, through collaboration platforms, through, specialized IP exchange zones. And so one way or another, I found myself doing more and more with them. And over the years, working closely with Airbus's senior management, together with people who are today some of my colleagues at Airbus Ventures, we hit upon the usefulness and importance of designing and building our own venture fund. And once we had that underway, I found myself back in Asia after a couple of decades away, and thrilled to be building this great enterprise with our entrepreneurs and portfolios.
Wow, what a background. And when it comes to the fund, as you just alluded to, what is the fund's investment thesis, ticket size, and what are some of the most notable investments that you've had till date in Asia Pacific?
So our investment thesis is not strictly focused on aerospace and aerospace technologies per se. One of our motivations in creating Airbus Ventures was to be able to gain sight of new startup companies, often in stealth mode, not readily visible, that maybe only the top tier VCs in the US or networks of VCs in places like Asia Pacific would be able to see. And the way for us to gain insight to critical deal flow would be our being able to play the same game the same way, meaning that we would be able to protect the startup company's IP, create the appropriate firewalls with our mothership Airbus, be able to respond quickly, wire money quickly, reach our own decisions as investment partners, have our own investment committee, and so on. This formula has worked really well for us. And just as we designed the fund to kind of uncover, the unknown and the surprising amongst, stealth companies, we were also keen and aware that, today's aerospace is not necessarily tomorrow's aerospace, is no longer the traditional large aerospace competitors that are playing in this field. Certainly the likes of, Amazon, Google, Facebook, others are making notable contributions now. And at the same time, the technologies impacting aerospace are widening by the day. So key developments in robotics and telecommunication, in connectivity, new insights in machine learning and in quantum technology are all relevant. And so our investment thesis is wide enough to be able to embrace these technologies that are impacting. But if I highlighted autonomous systems and connectivity and deep space technology together with quantum and frontier technologies in AI and robotics, it should give your listeners a flavor for the kind of span of investment thesis that we carry out. Here in Asia Pacific, I might pick out a couple of what I think are really stellar investments. One is in Japan, where we discovered early on a seed stage company that was designing algorithms and hardware to allow virtually any satellite ground station antenna to communicate with any satellite. This is through innovative cloud technologies and security developments that had been foreseen by most players in the industry to be 10 years in the future. And we were delighted to be able to introduce a company already pulling telemetry from space over a laptop. A really astonishing kind of development in the industries that we look at. Typically, a satellite operator owns its own infrastructure on the ground, and they have to wait until their satellite or their fleet is flying over specific ground stations. If they can access any antenna, then it means that they can download and communicate, downlink and uplink in near real time, which for many applications is a real cutting edge in performance. Similarly, if you're an antenna operator and your antenna is idle, 95% of the time waiting for a specific satellite, suddenly you have a new income source from all the rest of the world that wants to securely use your antenna. They have done great since then. We've done a couple of rounds of investment since. We were delighted to have led the Series A from the start. And they're now, they anticipated, the new developments with, for example, Amazon Web Services and their ground station capability. And we think they've still got a better, smarter solution. So look out Amazon, look out Google. I think this one is a delight. A couple of others I quickly highlight are out in Singapore. One of our first investments is in a company called Transcelestial, which will ultimately be able to provide novel, secure capabilities for laser communications from satellite to the ground and satellite to satellite. I'm so impressed by them because they, in demonstrating their ground-to-ground capabilities, they proved superior capabilities for telecommunications on a terrestrial basis right here on Earth. Being able to provide stable telecommunication in the middle of strong, cyclones at the worst possible season in Singapore when everything else was shutting down. Their building to building and demos were the ones that held up and attracted great interest. And I'm sure they're on a fantastic path to success, but I'm delighted that at a relatively early stage, they're earning, real revenues here on Earth to help them build a constellation of satellites in the near future for really radicalizing telecommunication capabilities. Another one in Singapore I'd just pick out is Zero Error Systems, another fabulous team providing capabilities for radiation proofing electronics in space. The classical solutions have been either very expensive electronics and or very heavy shielding. And neither is great when you're trying to develop better access through space through low cost, low weight, frequent launches to space of key componentry. Their solution is to have a kind of master switch that allows a shutdown of components, monitoring by the millisecond when there are dangerous radiation levels from solar radiation or cosmic radiation. It keeps testing to see when the events are over and then puts the switch back on and everything goes as normal thereafter. What this means is that off-the-shelf cheap electronics, which keep getting smarter and lighter weight, can now be used more extensively in satellites. And I think their design capabilities have many applications to other businesses outside of space. And I think they're going to do just fabulously. So, it's just a flavor of some of the stuff we're very excited to be part of. And unlocking these gems here in Asia Pacific is just part of helping us build this wider system of interactions across our global portfolio. You asked me about ticket size. Generally speaking, we're an early stage investor. We focus on seed and Series A, Series B. We do some Series C. we're now on our third fund, so we're gradually growing to be able to follow the money deeper into bigger rounds. But we make investments probably typically in the sort of $500,000 to 10 million range.
And earlier in the conversation, Lewis, you'd really alluded to this aspect of the design of the fund or the fund design, right? And it's quite unique when it comes to your LP or your LP, and it is quite unique when it comes to your LP and GP setup. So when the fund, right, was started about 6 years ago, and tell me if I'm wrong, Airbus was the lead LP from the first fund. But as Airbus Ventures kind of moved into raising its second and third fund, your LP base became more diversified, as the aim was to be a highly autonomous, pure financial VC. Can you tell us more about this process and what it is also like running a cross-border VC fund?
So it's an unusual setup. You're right. We started about 5 years ago. Airbus Mothership at the beginning was our sole limited partner, our sole LP. But we had set it up in a LP GP relationship from the start, anticipating that when the right moment came and based on performance, we would wish to invite external capital, additional LPs. And although we operate as a pure financial VC, I mean, we're in it to support our companies and make money and co-invest with top tier VCs. So we share those objectives. There is a kind of implicit strategic benefit in the sense that by working with other LPs from other industries, we gain some perspective on the other technologies and competitive fields that are impacting aerospace. So as I mentioned, one of our objectives is to have this wider view, to see the next technologies on the horizon that will help reshape the system of space development, what we call the Z-axis. Instead of being stuck in the XY plane, we're working on the systems of technologies that allow us to gain ascent, up the Z-axis to the point where we're able to provide a real system response for, it sounds, idealistic, but we see it as, for humanity and the benefit of planet Earth and for our future. So encapsulating these idealistic ideas, encapsulating these perspectives from other LPs, we function and operate as a pure VC, but we think there's something extra and different in it for us. And it certainly for us as partners and team members of Airbus Ventures stimulates our thinking and helps us to see connections that maybe are harder to see when we don't have that breadth of support. The other interesting thing of this, you're right, rather new model is that although there are no hooks from Mothership Airbus, there's no requirements for a startup company taking money from us as Airbus Ventures at all related to Airbus Mothership, and there is that firewall on IP and everything else. Once we have invested in a company, if a startup wishes, there's the whole world of Airbus Mothership as a business platform. And quite a few of our startup companies have enjoyed good business relationships and partnerships on their own, facilitated by us where needed, with Mothership Airbus. And this really accelerates them versus their competitors to be able to gain a global partner in kind of one shot. And we think that's another special aspect of this. To make that work, you're right. You asked me about the global cross-border dynamic. This is also unusual for a venture capital fund. We took it on ourselves from the beginning to, base our headquarters, right there, Sand Hill Road, Menlo Park, Silicon Valley, make sure that we're there, so that any startup in the area can walk in the door and, 5 minutes later, we can have a chat with and other top tier VC and think about co-investment opportunities. At the same time, for us to be able to activate the global system, it's very much, Europe, where Airbus itself originated, but also here in Asia Pacific, where so much of the cutting edge of relevant new technologies is pushing the boundaries faster and faster. So, we feel a need to be able to do that. Operationally for us, it's kind of in the DNA of Airbus to be global. It's always been a global a global enterprise. It's part of what has always attracted me to Airbus over the years has been the ability, which I think is nascent in having a European project, right? I mean, they started building aircraft across French, German, Italian, everybody's borders, speaking different languages, coming from different cultures, and it worked. Spectacular innovations in aircraft and related technologies came from this ability to work as a system across boundaries. And I think we're helping to scale that and to bring these capabilities from and across Asia Pacific to the US, Europe, Middle East, and really find the entrepreneurs wherever they are and help them scale and build and connect and be part of the system.
Now, there's a point I really want to reiterate. And in a graph, right, you have the x-axis, the y-axis, the z-axis. And Airbus Ventures, like you mentioned, speaks about the z-axis and its investments into the z space. Can you reiterate what this concept of the z space means and how it's instrumental in your mission? It's a very interesting way of putting it across.
Sure. I think conceptually, when we started thinking about the system of things that we see as activating aerospace development, we saw it as composed of things that really are layered in multiple dimensions, incrementing up the z-axis. So it's about the ground station capabilities, it's about the launcher capabilities, it's about the autonomous drones, the connectivity systems based on terrestrial technologies. It's about, high altitude balloon capabilities. It's of course about orbital satellites. It's about deep space missions. It's about constellations of spacecraft in orbit and beyond orbit. It's about transit to further planets. So it's there's kind of this natural pull, if you like, off of the XY plane. But also we discovered so many interconnecting points that really do define this as a system. If we're looking at, astrospace with its recent success and launching to orbital space, if we think about, who is able to track a launch, a company like Leo Labs in our portfolio, their specialty is not just detecting small objects in space and managing space debris. It's also about tracking launches and orbital insertion of payloads and being able to rescue, if you like, satellites that have gone astray and to identify them in time and to help correct their orbits. It's also about companies like I mentioned with Infostellar, with the ground station capabilities, being able to ensure there's a fully active, dense network of antenna and communication, so there are no kind of blank spots when you're on your way to orbit. Once your payload is there, you want it to be able to function well, whatever the related cosmic events might be. So you've got people like ZES providing the security and reliability of the communication. You have people like our friends at Transcelestial able to provide novel means of communicating through free space optics, through laser communications, avoiding all the spectrum constraints. Every one of these companies is somehow part of this interdependent system, and it's this ascent up the z-axis that is kind of dragging all of these system behaviors up with it And for us as investors, I guess it's also it's a convenient way for us to screen and to think about our investment program. I find myself when I'm talking to, a potential startup investment, thinking about, where do they fit in the system? What do they do to add, density of reliability into system performance? How can they change and activate new elements of the system? So it becomes a way to kind of cleanly and importantly think through the fit and the capability and the investment profile. And at the same time, I don't think we're wild-eyed ascensionists either. We're aware that every new technology uh, can be a big boon to humankind. If we get it wrong, it can also be one of the things that threatens the future of humankind. And so we're always looking for the connecting points in a system that includes more than just the technology per se. We're looking for teams and skills and capabilities that help develop the necessary regulatory regimes, people who are aware of the importance of international collaboration, the importance of going beyond nationalistic programs and being able to be part of the international scene, which again is very much part of our DNA as global participants in venture and aerospace technology. This is also part of it. So the Z-axis and its ascension is something that makes sense for us in terms of how we steer our vision of financial return. And so far, so great. Seems to be working very well. But it's also a means for us to work with our teams as people shaping the future of who we are and the planet itself. So many of these technologies and teams are central to resolving some of the biggest challenges here on Earth, and we see that kind of Z-axis as not something you climb and go away and leave the Earth behind with. It's something that gives you an extra capability to be able to bring benefit to the Earth. If I think of another company, I'm chairman over in the US of a company called Atlas AI. They take satellite images and other data sources and apply absolute state-of-the-art machine learning to be able to do predictive economics on things like crop yields in Africa, to be able to foresee infrastructure and electric grid developments in a way where aid provided in critical areas. We're co-investors in Atlas AI together with the Rockefeller Foundation. We work closely with them to be able to bring these state-of-the-art technologies from space, from AI, from machine learning, combine the remote sensing and economic algorithmic capabilities to derive something that's deeply useful. And as we enter deeper into a phase of dangerous global heating with all the concomitant changes in crops and migration, water, everything that goes with that, more and more we're going to need to be focused on the Z-axis as a delivery mechanism for making sure this planet works by being able to reach as high as we need to and as deep and as far as we need to go to be able to bring those benefits back.
So in your eyes, Asia Pacific is truly rich in innovation. You've been quoted to say that a couple of times and a variety of different articles that you've been mentioned in.
My interest in Asia Pacific innovation, I mean, this probably goes right back to when I was a teenager, watching the space program get kind of less and less interesting back in the US at the same time that East Asian competitors were making huge strides in automotive and consumer electronics. And I knew I wanted to see some of this for myself because I thought if some of those same energies could be applied to aerospace development, that maybe we could tackle internationally, the approach to key aerospace, outer space developments a bit more collectively, and to tap some of those energies together. That's what first brought me out here, working as an engineer in Japan. Fabulous experience, able to spend time thereafter in Singapore and Hong Kong, getting a sense for all the broader capabilities, across, the vast landscape, and finding that there were key nodes, throughout that were attracting entrepreneurs, not just across Asia Pacific, but from around the world. And of course, we see it today. I mean, exactly in places like Singapore, where talent is drawn globally to really fabulously concentrate and develop new capabilities. I love discovering you know a lab or a recent postdoc working on something and thinking through what might take shape as a company, as a new stint in the world, not just from the point of the technology itself, but from building an enterprise that satisfies real needs and scales quickly enough to have the impact that they should really have. When I was first in Asia years ago, the idea of students not working for large corporations or ministries and so on, and instead cutting out on their own to try to build something on their own was, in most countries, kind of countercultural. And today, I love seeing that there's really a new pulse where if you have a strong idea, if you have some friends who share your belief in that idea, and they're willing to work hard, you've got room and space, culturally, and with family, with friends, with professors, in a way I'd not seen in many, many years. And I think this lends itself well to what I think is going to be a huge acceleration of talent and venture impact coming from Asia Pacific.
So, Lewis, there was a recent press release that spoke about how Mitsubishi UFJ, the Development Bank of Japan, and Fuyo General Lease were planning on investing in early stage aerospace technologies, along with Airbus Ventures. What are some of the aerospace trends you're currently seeing in Asia Pacific? And why are only Japanese investment corporations taking advantage of this opportunity?
So our friends at Mitsubishi UFJ, Fuyo General Lease, Development Bank of Japan, um, I think they are, I hope, representative of a widening array of collaborators who can really help us develop our investment program, not only across Asia Pacific, but even globally. And I expect similar collaboration from international enterprises and institutions from across the world. I, I suppose each has their own motivation. Development Bank of Japan has a rich history looking out for the interests of Japan as a nation, and as a Asia Pacific and worldwide collaborator in its own right. Specifically thinking about the future of aerospace and space development on a practical level. I think these businesses also interest both Mitsubishi and Fuyo, in that at their core, these groups have, for example, aircraft leasing divisions that look no doubt toward new leasing opportunities, and maybe what could be better than leasing new infrastructure for aerospace development, or satellites instead of aircraft, spectrum, to go alongside that. And I think it is indicative of new trends and capabilities that will be increasingly of interest here in Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific is a vast region. It's a complex of many boundaries, international cultures, interactions of every kind, vast areas of the oceans, and for everything from monitoring fishing resources and activities to being able to help ports to foresee incoming traffic, having the connectedness required to be able to bring the level of health, resources, connectivity, security all into one place means maybe a faster reliance on these kinds of what I think of as connectivity technologies. So whether that's a transcelestial, terrestrial, point-to-point, stable means of communication. If we think about things like the Indonesian archipelago and how expensive it is to provide connectivity with deep sea cabling, island to island to island, why not clean laser communication and capabilities that really help us rethink the equation of development in the Asia Pacific region. There'll be new technologies, discoveries, innovations out of the US, Europe, elsewhere in the world that will find their home here in Asia. We've invested in an extraordinary company called Spin Launch in the US, which is using clean energy, kinetic energy, solar power, electric power to be able to launch spacecraft in a completely novel way without using chemical rockets. Their capabilities could be located, in multiple areas within the Asia Pacific region to really radicalize the way we think about low cost access to space. And I think it's the global players based in Asia Pacific who will help us, develop and see this truly world view, this planetary view of how aerospace can function as a system and how we can find the world's best entrepreneurs to be part of that system.
Well said, Lewis. And when it comes to the long-term movements of Airbus Ventures and expansion, your current HQ for Asia is based in Tokyo, Japan. Do you plan on expanding to other locations anytime soon?
Yes, indeed. I mean, just following the pattern of my own travels, the team and I from Tokyo have been, for example, tracking and developing some great investment opportunities in Singapore. I anticipate that, in the course of next year, we'll have opened our new Singapore office, which will help us reach out not only to Southeast Asia and beyond, but also probably helping us establish further links in New Zealand and Australia. We're starting to develop some opportunities and insights in Korea and other parts of North Asia. I think it's likely that, given time, we'll find these extraordinary Asia Pacific entrepreneurs everywhere and anywhere in Asia, and I hope we're able to follow that pathway ourselves.
And to wrap up our call with our last question for today, what piece of advice would you give to people out there from the journey you've had so far in life?
Wow, thank you for that question. I don't often get asked such an open but important question. I guess my first answer spontaneously is to embrace complexity. One of the characteristics that I think we find in our best entrepreneurs is that they're tackling really tough problems where there's a lot of system interaction. There are new emergent patterns. They somehow are developing and exercising skills of pattern recognition to see where the really significant patterns are emerging, and they're acting on it. And I think it's something about being open to new ideas, to being orthogonal in one's thinking, to just say, huh, what if I look at this in a completely different way? Or what if this noise actually has some kind of hidden order in it? And I think the secret to that is, staying curious and looking at developments in other fields and being multidisciplinary and embracing that whole mess, because if you can handle it, if your curiosity drives you to it, then you'll be the one that starts stitching those things together in a new way, and you'll start attracting the right people, the right team, the right believers. People will sense that you're onto something. The system itself, I believe, will respond to you, because when you're kind of pulling significance out of the complexity, it's almost eerie. It's almost like a quantum effect of its own, how that complexity is drawn to forming up a new pattern. And if you can set out that significant pattern ahead of other people, then you're redefining the whole system and shaking everything else up in it. So, keep the eyes open, stay curious, embrace that complexity, and build something out of it. And I hope we're there to help.
And Lewis, for people who are interested in potentially reaching out to you or catching a cup of coffee with you, what would be the best point of contact?
Oh, please find me. Email is good. It's Lewis, Lewas, at airbusventures.vc, VC for venture capital.
Lewis, it was a pleasure having you on Geeks of the Valley, and thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Hope to speak again soon. Thank you.